Hello, ladies, and thank you for joining me here today at Her Theology. I'm really excited that you're with us. We have Patricia Warekoon, which has been somewhat of a dream. I've read and followed Patricia's stuff for a little while, and I remember back in the day when we started Her Theology, I thought, imagine if I could get Patricia on to talk about sex. Anyway, here we are talking not about sex exactly, but transgender movement today. And so, Patricia, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's great. And I just want to outwardly honour you and thank you for the ministry and the impactful work you have done around Australia. I know a lot of marriages that have been impacted positively by the work you've done. And I actually know some people that have been counselled by you in regards to sex therapy, and it's been a game changer. So I very much appreciate your heart to, help shape the church in a really holy way towards sex and gender and all that sort of stuff. So it's fantastic.
And
so thank you.
thank you, Cass, and to God be the glory, not to us.
Amen. Yep. I love how he gives these little vessels amazing gifts. So now, Patricia, you are a retired academic for sure, a sexologist, sex educator, a writer, a speaker, a bit of this, a bit of that. Clearly, you're a very busy woman, so we appreciate your time. You're a mother and you're a wife, right? So, and you studied kind of all over the shop. You've lived in all different places around the world, it seems like. So maybe you can fill us in a little bit more about who you are, just briefly.
Yeah, I listened to everything you said about me and I thought, she forgot to say that I'm also a creative writer and I love to do craft and tatting and cooking. So never mind. I was born in Sri Lanka, in the tea plantations of Sri Lanka, and went to a Methodist missionary school. My parents were Christians, but I kind of came to know the Lord with a British missionary who was a chaplain at school. Went to medical school, then I was teaching at the medical faculty in Sri Lanka, did my postgraduate study in Hawaii. There, my professor I worked with was actually, at that time, Professor Milton Diamond, one of the world's best known people working in gender. This was 1980s. And I used to help him run what at that time were called transsexual clinics.
Oh, wow.
Went back to Sri Lanka 6 years. I was the only sex therapist in the country. That was busy. And then moved to Australia 35 years ago, academic with Sydney Uni for 24 years, last 8 years as director of a graduate program in sexual health. Retired 12 years ago at the age of 64, so you can do the mathematics. I'm now 76. And since then, I thought retirement was going to be knitting and tatting and relaxing, but God had other plans. So here we are.
Amen for that. And I love that. I actually really love meeting women that have retired and are still really active and serving and just seeing the kingdom of God go forth. And I really appreciate that. So it's nice for us younger women to see that, and to see how that plays out across our lives. So let's get stuck in. I have, for our listeners, I have just finished reading, well, not just, I finished a week or two ago reading The Gender Revolution, a biblical, biological and compassionate response by Patricia Warekoon, by her son as well, and Dr. Robert Smith, who we had on the podcast before talking about Trinity and the Holy Spirit. This has been a game changer of a book. It's been actually really refreshing to find Australian content on this issue. I find a lot of it's American or European. Australia seems to be fairly silent in leading the way on how to approach this topic. I'm not saying that there's not other people speaking about it, but I would say a large portion of what is out there is from America. So it was really encouraging and refreshing to know that the authors are here. You may not be born in Australia, but I'm going to say you're pretty Australian in all of our eyes. Patricia, we'll take you as one of ours. And this book has been really insightful. I cannot recommend it enough for listeners, and I'm sure we're going to explore it as we go into the interview. But Patricia and co did a fantastic job at giving you a real biblical response all the way through each chapter, like really coming back to scripture and saying, this is why we believe what we believe, and this is how we can approach it in a way that loves and honors people that are on this journey, but at the same time standing for truth and really calling out the lies that society is placing out there. I love it because it also had a lot of data in there. So we actually are given the stats and the research and the papers, and all the footnotes are there. So you can go research it yourself. So you can actually come to the conversation equipped and confident to know what is truth, backed by actual real data and life experiences for individuals. So that's my preamble about the book. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. You can purchase it anywhere, any Christian retailer in Australia. Before we get stuck in and before I start throwing Patricia a whole lot of questions, I do want to start by saying this. I'm going to read out 2 sections of the book towards the beginning of the book here, but just to paint the picture that anyone listening, I don't know where you're at. You might be someone that's actually struggling with transgender and your gender identity. You could be someone where you have someone that's very close to you. It could be one of your children. It could be your spouse. It could be a friend or a family. Who knows? But you might be really feeling this person on a personal level. Or you might be someone like me who it's not necessarily in my backyard, but I feel very passionate about this, but I also can be a little bit too aggressive in my passion sometimes. And so I want to start by saying everything you hear on this podcast is actually coming out of a place of love, because I know for a fact, Patricia, having spoken to her, having read the book, and I know for myself, I can say wholeheartedly, it's because we love people and we love the way that God's good design was for man and woman and to be the image bearers of God. And in doing so, we want to pursue truth, and we want to push people to that truth and that purpose and that identity. So I'm just going to read out this section just to give you, I guess, a taste of the book, but also to help set the tone for this interview, which is: Christians believe in a healthy, God-given pattern. We simultaneously yearn to see people live in line with that pattern, trusting as we do that God's ways are best and his design is good, while also extending compassion to those who do not fit neatly within. So the key point here is we oppose transgender ideology not out of hatred, but out of love. We care about people who don't fit the neat binaries of normal sex development and who experience gender incongruence. And it's precisely because we love them that we long to see them finding lasting solutions that acknowledge reality rather than deny it. So I just wanted to start with that. And I guess now we can get stuck in. So Patricia, what is, and this is quite a broad question, but what is the issue? Why is this transgender movement, before we go into the history and the origins, why is it an issue for Christians? Why should we care?
We should care for a number of reasons, really, Cass. I guess the base of it all is the fact that as Christians, we have a good story, a good narrative for life. And this narrative for life starts at creation with a very clear male and female. He created them. And as a scientist, doctor, biologist, the wonderful thing, or why should we say wonderful, it's kind of obvious, is the underpinning of science. For this male and female, he created them. So firstly, Christians are people of truth. We are people of light. And therefore, we have a duty, a God-given calling to be that truth and light to a world that is basically so confused. So that's the first thing, that as a church, as a people, we have this calling, this duty. Secondly, unfortunately, we are at a point when this transgender ideology, which we can talk about and tease out later if you wish, has affected our schools, social media, and even preschools. And therefore, it is something that we can no longer say it doesn't affect us. It is intimately in our homes. We can't be complacent. The church cannot be complacent. Families cannot be complacent. So, these are 2 main issues. And therefore, what we need is to equip people with a clarity of thinking underpinned with biblical word conviction, but also the heart to be compassionate and civil. So what I say is compassion towards people who are struggling, and a civility and politeness to discuss the issue, even when we are aggressively challenged. So we need to hold these things. And there's a tension there. But that's why we wrote the book. That's why we do the speaking.
Yeah. And I think that's a really big part of it, isn't it? That being civil, because whether it is something that is personal for us or not, I think regardless of what situation you're in, you may struggle with being civil in that because it hits home. It's personal. The defense comes up. So, and you do it in your book. You do that wonderfully, I will say. So I guess maybe you could start with a little bit of the history, because I'm sure for listeners that are tuning into this, I don't know, for me, I'm like, how have we come so quickly so far in what feels like less than 5 years? This wasn't on the radar. I mean, when I was in high school, yeah, it was 20 years ago, but still, it wasn't. No one spoke about this. This wasn't a thing. So maybe you could paint us a picture of the origins of how this kind of started. I guess it's been around forever, but how's it started and how did it pick up such speed and how did it get here?
There's a number of threads that have come in and formed this sort of interlocking tsunami. There can't be an interlocking tsunami. That's so wrong. But, you get my point.
Yes.
It's all come together at this time. So as a person who was researching and working in this area with my professor in 1980, let me just give you one main area which has influenced and caused this current climate. A long, long time ago, in late 1970s, there was a professor called John Money. And he and his colleagues really were the ones who first started talking in the science, medical, psychological area that there was a thing called gender, that there was sex, which is biology, but there is a thing called your recognition of who you are. And that somehow that has nothing to do with biology, and it's something that could be influenced by external factors, social constructivism from external. And it all but it came to a climax with a particular case that John Money dealt with. And that when that case was being discussed, I was actually doing my postgrad in Hawaii with Mickey Milton Damon. What happened was that there were twin boys. And what happened is when they were doing the circumcision, this is within a week or so, one child actually, due to surgical misadventure, the penis, the genital was damaged. And so he said that if we remove the genitals and bring this boy up as a girl, then the child will accept that he's a girl. Anyway, they did the surgery, brought the child up as a girl. They called that the John Jean or John Joan case. So there were two boys, but they brought this one who had the surgical misadventure up as a girl. But to cut the long story short, it just didn't work. The kid rebelled in the teens and then later on very sadly committed suicide. But the reality is that it showed that the biological sex and this inner feeling of who you are is just cannot be separated. It just is. So I am a woman biologically and I am a woman. It's not like I feel like a woman. And this was the 1980s. So it started there with John Money and his colleagues. And from there on, there were various other, like Judith Butler and the other psychologists who worked in that area. And slowly there was this kind of confusion between categories of biology and sexual orientation and who you see yourself as and behavior, all these categories started getting just conflated and confused. And then we got to the point where there was this big lesbian, gay, bisexual, pride and movement, and this I was born this way, and the movement towards marriage, equality, and that push. So it was that push then consumed the lobby groups because that was the thing to push. So it was born this way. Then the marriage equality comes through. And it's almost as if the lobby groups had nothing to lobby. And it was like, what do we do next? And so, and all of a sudden, like this out of nowhere, it was like not just born this way, but born in the wrong body.
It's crazy.
And that's the sort of seems to be the trajectory. But a lot of people are like, the scientists, doctors are like just as confused as you are. It's like, where did it come from? Because there's a couple of other really important things that happened, and maybe one really important thing, and that is social media.
Yeah.
And social media also around 2010, 2011, when Instagram came in and, TikTok, and that social media then made it available across the globe.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the influencers then seemed to catch on to it. So there was this uptick of, the lobby groups needing to lobby. There was this thing of like social media encouraging it. And it seems that has driven it. But interestingly, and break in and ask me questions if you want. I shouldn't ramble on, but I really want to say one more thing.
You're doing well.
Interestingly, when I was working with my professor in Hawaii, 1980s, we used to see adult men who would say, I want to be a woman. Now, some of them would say, I have felt like this since I was very young. Others would say, it's fairly recent. But they would be adult men. And the majority of them, not majority, the ones that I talked to, would recognize I am a man, but I would like to be a woman. And therefore, I would like to go through the process to be a woman. But all the while, they recognized that they were male.
They weren't
So
in denial.
that's what we were seeing. Suddenly, around sort of 2015, over the last less than a decade, we have this huge upswing. And it's like thousands-fold upswing of teenagers and children, but mainly teenagers, and that too girls. So going from adult men, we are now seeing a preponderance, a huge number of young people, teenagers, and mainly girls. That's what's frightening.
Yeah, and it's bizarre. Look, I'm not going to lie, and I've been public about it. I'm not a fan of feminism. I have a lot of issues with it. And I do wonder if part of that is it's just gone so far, the feminist message, that girls are now desiring to be boys because it's just like there's just so much confusion about what it means to be a woman. And there's so many messages. Like it almost seems simpler to be a man at the same time. I don't think it is necessarily. I think it's got a lot harder for the guys. But yeah, why do you think there is such a huge burst of girls, young girls wanting to be guys? What's going on there?
Again, people would say there's various reasons. So let me just lay out some of the theories that are being looked at. One of the theories that basically the ideologues like to trot out is that what they call social acceptance. So what they would say is that just because now there is an acceptance that it's okay to identify as something other than your biological sex. And because the society accepts it, so these people are coming out. But wait a minute, Why only teen girls? Why aren't older women like me coming out? After all,
Absolutely.
if we was repressed and all of a sudden society now allows it, we should see it across the ages, across the
Absolutely.
sexes,
Mm.
male and female. Why only teen girls coming out? So that's one rebuttal of that social acceptance theory. The second one would say, and this is, you touched on this, and that is that girls are actually fleeing femininity, being women, because a couple of things there too. Firstly, there is a very strong influence with pornography. Porn
Mm.
portrays girls as objects. And unfortunately, with this high use of pornography, average age of first porn exposure is 10 years or
Oh,
11 and dropping, I think,
it's
in
dropping.
Australia.
I read 9 the other day, and I was like, oh god, goodness, it's not good.
Yeah. So our boys and girls, we used to think it's only boys. Now boys and girls are being exposed to violent, misogynistic imagery. And there are girls who are saying, I want out of here. I don't want to be this pornified imagery. That's
Mm.
one area. The second area is that girls and boys are, being, by social media, they're growing up in this sort of comparator culture where they're comparing their body and what's happening with other people online, with influencers, and they are being told that pubertal changes, if you are uncomfortable with your pubertal changes, then you must actually be the other sex. Now, I'm 76, but I can throw my mind back a long, long time to puberty in Sri Lanka. I didn't sort of go, yay, I'm getting breasts, woohoo, my first menstrual cycle. But you took it that these things happen, and this is what adolescence, this is what puberty is. Not anymore. Online, our kids are being told, if you don't like your breasts, then you must be a boy. And hey, we can help you get binders and we can help you deal with it. If you're a boy and you don't like your body hair and your genitals, then you must be a girl. So there is this influence on social media, and there is a glorification of this. If you don't like your body, then you must be the other. And so they call that what's called social contagion. That, there are places, doctors tell me that sometimes they would see 4 girls from the same class or friendship group coming out and saying, I'm transgender. And it's like, wait a minute, how can that be?
It's
So
not.
there is
Yeah.
a definite social contagion there. And you are right. In some ways, feminism that said we want to break the so-called glass ceiling, all of a sudden, there seems to be a reversal by the
Yes.
ideologists where stereotypes of behavior have actually are in resurgence. So, as this we see in children. So, a little girl who likes doing boy things, and I was a tomboy. I mean, I
Yeah.
was growing up in Sri Lanka, conservative Tamil Christian family. I had to do the cooking and the cleaning while my brothers were out there, climbing the mango
Having
tree and
fun.
having fun on their bikes. And I was like, whoa, why would I want to be a girl? I used to plead with my mother, can I wear my brother's shorts? Can I go out? Because we were not allowed to wear trousers or shorts, or only skirts. Can I wear my brother's shorts? Can I go out and climb a mango tree? And my mom would say, that's all right, darling. We'll think about it later. Now come and help me with the cooking. And then you hit puberty and then you accept. But today, a little girl who's a tomboy is being told, oh, you must be a boy.
Mm.
And let's put you through this, what's called social affirmation. And let's put you on the road. And a little boy who likes ballet and likes wearing pink and, maybe playing around with mommy's high heel shoes is told, oh, if you like those things, then you must be a girl. And the statistics here, and people are not listening to the science. The science is clear. If children are what we call gender non-conforming, that is, they don't like to fit into the stereotype. And these kids, if allowed, as we call it, to live in their skin and given a little bit of maybe family therapy or just allowed to understand how they feel and explore those feelings, over 85%
Oh, I
will
couldn't believe this
accept
stat.
their biology at puberty, like I did. And some of the others may grow up with same-sex attraction, with same-sex attraction feelings, because there is a correlation with gender non-conforming behavior and same-sex attraction in adult life. But these children are being put on the path. And the science is also clear that if these children are put on the path of what we call social affirmation, which is the change your clothes, change your names, change your pronouns,
Be whatever you want to be.
be what you want to be, and not just you be what you want to be. It kind of, you can say be what you want to be, but insist that all of society accepts you as that other. So, for instance, I've had a mother recently to ask me that her 5-year-old daughter's best friend, also a girl, has come back this semester as a boy to school. Now, 5 years old.
That's
Cass, I
crazy.
put it to you, a 5-year-old, if told that someone can change their sex, will actually believe it.
Oh, yes, I have a
And if somebody,
5-year-old and he is so impressionable. So,
correct.
so impressionable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So this is what happens. It's not just your child. It's insisting that everyone else buy into that unreality of,
Mm.
and then these children, especially if then put on what are called puberty blockers, 98% will stay on to cross-sex hormones and surgery. What are we doing? We are taking these little impressionable children who just don't want to fit into a stereotype and putting them on the train to lifelong medicalization and surgery and loss of all sexual function, of loss of fertility, and a life of surgical and medical,
And it's crazy
problems.
to think about what you touched on before. 85%, was it? If they were to just move through puberty,
At least
at
85% will
least 85.
accept it,
Yeah,
which is like I did, and which a
massive.
lot of adults say they did.
And I don't understand then why the medical world, sorry, I have my theories. They make a lot of money out of this.
That too.
I think people need to come to terms with the reality that big pharma is making a lot of money out of this, because once you transition someone, they are on medication for the rest of their life. That's a lot of money that you can sign someone up for.
And surgery and plastic surgery.
Yep.
Because if you go from male to female, then you have feminizing surgery of the face and shaving of the larynx to get the voice, and then, forming the genitals, and this is big money. So yeah, that is true. There is big money, and there are some researchers who will actually trace I think it's Jennifer Bilek, Bilek, they trace the money trail. But there is also very fascinating, this coming out of universities. There are the researchers, this is that kind of the coming from the social sciences, the researchers who actually are the ones who are putting out this theory that there is a thing called gender identity, which there isn't. You can't measure it. See, Cass, if I may just take a minute, just talk about a little bit more about the unreality of this
Yes, go ahead.
concept.
Yeah.
You see, biological sex, which is something that is determined at conception, at fertilization, when sperm and ovum meet, at that point, male, female is established. So, sex, biological sex, and we don't have to use the word biological, sex is determined at conception, can be seen during the uterine development, and only visually confirmed at birth. Now, that's biology. Now, just that's about less than 0.02%, 0.018 or so, where this process doesn't take place, clearly male, female. And these rare children are born with what we call ambiguous genitalia, slightly enlarged clitoris, an undescended testes, ambiguous, very rare. Now, we as scientists, medics would call it disorders of sex development. The ideologists would call it, well, the common term, I shouldn't say just the ideologists, the common term is intersex. Now, that is picked up by the ideologists to say that male, female, and a third sex, wrong, that male, female, and disorders of sex development, which are extremely rare. Or they would say there's male, female, and just because this rare disorder, sex is a spectrum. Wrong. There's male, female, and disorders. Now, what has happened is the ideologues, fairly small numbers, but they pick up these issues, and this is just one issue, the fact that there are disorders of sex development, then the fact they would pick up the fact that there is a variation in pubertal development, secondary sexual characteristics. And because there is a variation of secondary sexual characteristics, sure, there are slim, feminine-ish feminine body boys, and there are butch girls. There are. That doesn't mean that sex is a spectrum. But these are picked up and say, if you are a girl who looks like a boy, and then, if you like boy things, then you are a boy. And these then have built into a rhetoric, which has actually now infiltrated medical bodies, like professional bodies, psychologists, counselors, politicians, and universities, where people can't anymore even define what is a woman. Even one of our ex-prime ministers, a female one, couldn't do that on television. And what's the problem? What is a woman? An adult human female. So a woman is someone who is an adult human female with the genitals and the gonads to produce what we would call large gamete or ova. And the male is a man is an adult human male with the apparatus, the genitals, and the testes producing the small gonad or the sperm. How hard is that? But because the activists and the researchers have come out and said there is this thing called gender identity which cannot be measured. There is no scientific measurement that we can measure gender identity by. There is no brain difference that we can find in people who say, I am not my birth sex. It's just self-declared, but we are told it is immutable. But we are also told that a person can change their identity. So it's almost like, how can it be both? But this is what has now captured everyone. And it's an attractive it's attractive to young people.
Yes.
You know, I would put it to any of your listeners that it is attractive to a troubled young person to think that you can magically get a new body and it will solve all your problems. Keeping in mind that there is a high, what we call comorbidity in these young people who are presenting with this, what we call the transgender, which is a discomfort with the body you are born in. And the word gender dysphoria means I am distressed, not just uncomfortable. Now, these children who are presenting this way, high correlation with autism,
Yes.
other neurodivergent conditions, depression, anxiety, suicidality, eating disorders, previous history of trauma, even abuse. All this science, we have the data, but who's listening?
No one. And they don't want to listen because
Yeah,
it doesn't fit their story. And
true.
I think this is something that you're presenting the facts here and giving it to our listeners. And as we're listening to this, you can come to some people with all this data and facts, but they don't want to hear because we live in a postmodern world where there is no truth anymore. There is no definitive truth. And when you can push away all truth, then there's no reality. How do you do this? But touching on what you're just saying then as well, what's absolutely heartbreaking is this, these disturbed and confused and distressed individuals, often young, are looking, they just want purpose. They're wanting fulfillment. And I don't know if you want to explain the suicide rates of those that have transitioned. It's horrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you see, the point is, Cass, that, okay, a parent wants to look after and care for their child.
Absolutely.
So here is let's take a little boy who really is a quirky, maybe on the spectrum, doesn't quite fit with the other boys, doesn't like rough and tumble play. He's actually happier with the girls playing tea party. So what happens when he's really tiny? That's cute. But once he starts going to school, he's the one who's going to pick on. He's the one who's going to get bullied. Now what happens? He's this little effeminate boy. Oh, he's quirky, he's intelligent, he's on the fringe. Somehow on social media or friends say, oh, you're so gay, or maybe you are a girl. That's getting into his mind. And he goes home and he says, Dad, Mom, I'm a girl. And he's so distressed. Now, parents, what do? You want to do the best by your child.
Absolutely.
You take the child to the doctor, and the doctor says, the GP, bless his heart, has only 10 minutes to see you. And he says, look, I don't know. I'm not familiar with this. Let me send you to a specialist, a gender clinic. So you go to the gender clinic. What do they say at the gender clinic? When the first meeting,
everything.
Oh, you've got a trans child. You actually not got a son, you got a daughter. And you need to affirm your daughter for what she is. And in front of the child, whether it's a child or a teenager, in front of the child, they tell the parents, and if you don't, the child might commit suicide.
Yes.
And would you
Yes.
rather have a live daughter or a dead son?
And I've heard this.
I
know people that have heard this.
Absolutely wrong data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's based on one small study which has now been completely blown out of the water.
Dismantled.
And the research now clear that suicide rates, yes, there are suicidality, but it's low. It's no different from other kids with the same kind of mental issues, the suicidality. And as you mentioned, the one or two studies, but one big study shows clearly that after transition, the rates are really high of,
Horrifying.
morbidity and ill health and suicidality and even suicides. So these are the lies, and parents believe it because they want to save their children.
Yeah.
And they go along with it, sadly. This is why they need information.
Absolutely. And this, I guess, there's other questions I have, but while we're on this topic, maybe you can help our listeners understand. I actually put it out to the listeners on social media. What are some of the questions you want to ask? And the resounding question I got time and time and time again was, I have a in-law, I have a cousin, I have a stepson, I have, someone really close to them that is wanting to, is identifying as the other gender, is either going through the process of transitioning. And they all were asking, how do I deal with this? How do I love this person and also still stand for the truth? How do I help them through this? So can you tell us, what do we do? It's a loaded question.
This is it is actually extremely difficult,
Very
because
hard.
what happens is, when it is your own child, you probably will, you may even then not get in, but you might be able to get in at the early phase.
Yeah.
But when it is a stepchild, a relative, you probably are coming in when they are already on the journey. And it's hard to pull back from there. So what I say to people is, firstly, be aware that you are very unlikely, I'm not saying it's impossible, very unlikely to be able to immediately pull them back by something you say or do. So accept that. What you can do, I tell people, and you use the word, is lean in with love and compassion. Because these people, the dysphoria, the distress is real. So you lean in with love and compassion to the distress. So be there as that person who is willing to listen. So actively listening to the person rather than trying to speak. Because, you have all the research, you've read the book, you've got all the data, but they're not going to listen, because the world has said to them, and the ideologues and social media and the health professionals have said to them, your feelings are what matter. And if your feeling says you're not your biological, your birth sex, then you are what you feel. And so you're giving all the data, and the science is not going to make a difference, because, like you said earlier, Cass, they don't hear it because they believe on feelings as true. So lean in with love and just listen to them, and just stay there for the long haul. Now, that's important. Another really important thing, and I want to address this to maybe parents or really close relatives like grandparents. Take care of yourself. The kid may be going down what we call the rabbit hole of transgender. Don't jump into that rabbit hole with them and lose your perspective. Take care of yourself and look after your health. So firstly, lean in with love and compassion, look after yourself. And thirdly, one really useful, I would say, activity is to involve this person in activities that have nothing to do with gender. So you don't even talk about gender. Find out things that this person, be it your child or your nephew or whoever, likes to do or liked to do before they got stuck into this rabbit hole, and make it a point to do those things. So maybe it was a child who liked music, and now once they started this whole transition thing, has got depressed and whatever, and given up. encourage them to come with you for a performance, even if it just means maybe bushwalk or something. Do something that has nothing to do with gender. Now, if it is your child, and I'm sorry for giving all the information in one, but I guess there may be a parent listening. If it is your child, one of the things that some of the parents have found useful is to actually take some time to get the child away from the environment, for instance, social media.
Yeah.
Just make sure that they're not on the social media that's encouraging them. And secondly, even taking the child away. There are parents who've taken a 6-month sabbatical and taken the child away.
Go on like a trip
And
around Australia or do something. Yeah.
correct. I mean, go for a trip or even go, say you're like like us, from some other culture, take them to the home culture, give them something completely different where they're not exposed to this craze. And so these are just some tips or some ways in which to deal with the issue. But there's no easy way. You're in there for the long haul.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard. I just feel for people that are going through that right now because I know that would be really hard to hear. I mean, it's helpful for us and it's good to hear that, but it is heartbreaking. It's a hard process to go through. And I imagine I would say, I mean, I'm not going through that personally, but this is why the church and being community is so important, because when you are faced with such trying times like that, it is absolutely essential that you are covered in prayer. You have people interceding over this sort of situation, and that you have safe people that are going to give you good, godly, biblical wisdom and help go on that, like you said, that long journey alongside you. And I always think of, Moses with his brother, and is it Jethro, that hold his arms up, in the battle. You need that sometimes. And I think a lot of these kids, I know when I was growing up and I was going through puberty, I mean, I had suicidal thoughts. I went through the whole rigmarole
Yeah.
of things. I moved out of home when I was 16. I did some really dumb things, and puberty sucks. It just sucks. And I have to say, what was a really big saving grace is that there was an older couple in the church I grew up with that were a safe space for me to go to, that I knew they wouldn't tell my parents, and I would just unleash all this. And so also, if you're listening to this, maybe it's not your child, but maybe you are someone in the church that could be the safe space for that child, that teenager, to come to and to offload to, and to just be, like you said, listening, just listening. On that note, another question that came up, and this is something I have, me too, you talk about being loving and compassionate and listening to them. I guess, where does that stop and start, though, with affirming the truth? So, for example, now it's very common for people to have pronouns, and you actually go into the book, a list of the pronouns, and my mind was blown. I thought I'd heard them all. Clearly I have not. They're very confusing. I actually want to read this comment from an evolutionary biologist, Colin Wright. He's clearly not a Christian, but he even says himself, this is a non-Christian, participating in pronoun rituals makes you complicit in gender ideology's regressive belief system, thereby legitimizing it. Far from an innocuous act signaling support for inclusion, it serves as an implicit endorsement of gender ideology and all of its radical tenets. And I thought, it's not just Christians that struggle with the whole pronoun thing. We're not alone. But I guess, what does it look like? How do we love and listen, but also at the same time not affirm this ridiculousness of pronouns and all that?
Yeah. You see, I make a differentiation, and I don't think we it's amazing, Cass. Really, we've actually developed our thinking since we published the book. And that's not that long ago, because the science and the information is moving so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And now I would really clarify a difference between acknowledgement of people's distress and acknowledging that these things to the person who is struggling with it. And here I'm really talking of somebody who's not just an activist who's just picked a trans label because it's cool to be queer or because everyone's doing it and I need a label too, which I have heard in some of the schools I've been to. It's
Absolutely.
not them, but the ones who really are feeling distressed. There is an acknowledgement that, yes, I hear you. I hear that you're struggling. And an affirmation of the unreality of gender identity, that there is really no such thing, that, it is just your feeling. And so it's like the tip of the iceberg. And there is a whole lot of ice under the water that needs to be explored. So acknowledging that without affirming the unreality is important. Now, how then does that play out when you are actually faced with someone? The first thing is that, when you're actually talking to someone, you don't really use pronouns when you're face to face with someone.
That's a good point. No, you don't.
Even if I'm talking to someone, I don't apply a pronoun face to face. So it's that we need to remember. We blow this pronoun thing big, but you could talk to someone without using pronouns. Now, there's a whole range of pronouns. Commonest they would use is, instead of he or she, they would say they. Now, apart from being grammatically crazy, it's clunky to use it. But
Yes.
there's a whole lot of other pronouns. So we differentiate between some of the other researchers and professionals and Christians who are undoubtedly wonderful converted Christians would say pronoun hospitality. Let's use the pronouns to be kind and hospitable. We take the line with Colin Wright and others to say that it's actually not kind to affirm an unreality, to affirm an untruth. We would use the word a lie to someone because what are you doing? This person is already confused. You are affirming that by using the pronouns. So we would say, I use the word pronoun reality, of, refrain from using the pronouns. And I would say, use a name. Now, names are names. Now, in Sri Lanka, we would have the name, for instance, the name Vasanta is both girl and boy. And there was a time when my fiance and my best friend were both Vasanta. And it's just a name.
It is what it is.
I married Vasanta, by the way. And my best friend, who's still she's in Melbourne, is Vasanta. It's a name. So if John decides to change to Jane, look, it may be a bit uncomfortable, but it's still, say, in respect to who you are, I'll use your name and use the name. We would say, do that. Refrain from the pronouns. Now, if you are asked to declare your pronouns, some officers do that, put it in you are well within your right to say, I'm sorry, I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't use it. So just say it. Yeah. And, you have a right. Just as the trans activists have a right, you have a right to say, I don't use these pronouns.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing we need to constantly, this is really important, that we actually raise our kids to be critical thinkers. Because I think if you apply the logic, if someone looks in the mirror and they see themselves as obese, so they stop eating, we don't affirm that delusion. We let them know that they are beautiful, that they are not obese, and we try and compassionately help them work through anorexia. If someone looks in the mirror and sees that they have no value or worth and they want to commit suicide, well, we don't affirm that in any way. Should take that back. There's some countries that do try and affirm that. But I would say largely we don't affirm suicide. We tell people they have a worth and a purpose, and we try and speak truth. And so I guess the same principle applies, doesn't it? I don't know why we throw that principle out with this.
Yeah. Yeah,
Be
I was
consistent.
just reading a paper this morning, as you do when you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And, this was a medical paper that said, nowhere in history have we treated a mental problem, a mental disorder, a dysphoria, a symptom, a distress, by actually changing the body and treating the body without trying to explore the symptom. This is the first time in like medical
Recorded
history
history. Yeah.
that we just follow a feeling and change the body. It's what we would call you're creating what the medics call an iatrogenic disease. That is a medically caused disease, because these people's bodies are forever going to need medication.
Yeah.
It's just horrendous what we are doing. And some of
abuse,
the
actually.
doctors, in fact, Colin Wright and people, and they would say, this is like you brought up anorexia. It's like a patient going with anorexia to the doctor, and the doctor saying, yeah, I'll give you liposuction.
You just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, we
Never.
wouldn't. But here, someone goes and says, I don't belong in the body I am. And they're like, okay, we'll change your body to suit whatever you wish.
Mm.
And there are girls and there are children. I spoke in one of the big Christian school groups to the staff. And there were a couple of schools where the teachers were telling me that children were actually saying, I'm a kitten. So that's called a xenogender, where you actually say, I don't belong to the human species. I belong to another species. I'm a cat.
Yeah, look, it's even in a school up the road here, Morisset High School, they've got a furries, I think, or something they call
Furries,
them.
yeah. Very common.
This is just, I mean, and so I guess I have two other questions on this. One's a little slight tangent, but I will go there. I am curious. I heard a little while ago a gentleman that was a detransitioner that became a Christian, and he now has I can't remember his name, sorry, but was it? Okay,
Probably, or
okay.
hair.
Yeah, and he helps a lot of people now transitioning. But he was saying that a large portion, he was saying almost nearly all of the men, it was started with a sexual fetish, this transgender, which was really interesting, because I know we've touched a lot on the women, but I'm just curious, is there any data to back that? Is there any information?
Yep.
Is it, yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting you should ask, because that was one of the things that we were seeing in 1980. It's a professor called Ken Zucker from Canada. And he's the one who's done, and another professor called Ray Blanchard. And these are people, when I was in the academy, I have been with them at conferences. Mainly Ray Blanchard has written in this area. And this was boys around adolescence or adult men who are turned on, aroused by the fantasy of themselves as a woman. Kind of with me there, I hope. So they are turned on by fantasizing of themselves as a woman. Now, when we used to see this in the 80s, we considered it a fetish. And, you'd help them deal with those fantasies. Today, a man who says, I am a woman, now it's not in, nobody explores whether it's actually that he's fantasizing of himself as a woman. It's even given a name. It's called autogynephilia. Auto, myself, gyne, woman, philia, love. So autogynephilia. And we're seeing that. Now, this is, we think, now we don't know for sure, but think Caitlyn Jenner, who the famous Caitlyn Jenner phenomenon, the tennis star, maybe? What was
Runner.
he before?
I think he was a runner.
Yeah.
He was a runner, I think.
Yeah. So he became she after getting married and having children, and probably autogynephilia, the fetish. Now, we also see it in like teen boys, but they come out usually as adults. And sadly, adults who've been married and had children. And for your listeners, this is really significant. And I've seen it in churches, because what happens is a man who's married and with children says, I am a woman. Now, what does it make his wife? And he says, but if you love me, you will stay with me. What does that mean to the children? See, in the culture that says only you matter, your happiness matters, we are seeing this in the church.
It's totally backwards.
What does it mean for your family? What does it mean for your children? Are they going to have your dad turn into a mom? What is this? And, as a church, this is why, as a church, we need to be educating our people.
Absolutely.
And every time I hear a minister who's the courage to speak into this space, it's so exciting. I mean, you're 76, you get excited about a sermon.
No, not true. I get very excited about it as well, so don't worry, you're not alone.
That's right. I mean, the other day I found one online when a Presbyterian church in Brisbane, he did a whole sermon on this. And at the end of it, he said, I got everything from this book. And I thought, oh, here was I thinking you were so smart. But anyway, the point is, it was so exciting. Here's a man, a minister, who's willing to take the church on the journey to know the truth. And we need that, because otherwise we can't be complacent. We are going to be caught out when people come. And you mentioned Voltaire as detransitioner. A detransitioner is somebody who's gone down the road and then regretted it. And we are seeing girls in their 20s
in the masses
who say, I was 14 and I went to the doctor and they put me on puberty blockers. I was 15 and they cut off my breasts. And now I'm 25, 24. I will never have the ability to breastfeed my children. And sometimes they've even removed the uterus.
I was going to say, some of them can't even have children. I mean,
they can't, because those puberty blockers can cause complete sterility.
They've castrated these children.
And there's increasing numbers. And now we are seeing increasing numbers of lawsuits and legal, cases going through. So maybe that will make a difference. So, I mean, maybe the tide is turning. We are hoping, we are praying that the tide is turning, which is all the more reason that we as churches, Christians, we must be ready. Because we must be the home to all these broken people.
Oh, absolutely. I can't agree with you more. And I'm getting emotional now, because I just think of these poor, beautiful girls, that have been mutilated. It absolutely breaks my heart. And I pray and I hope that more Christians would be bold in having these conversations. And like you said, having a response, having a space for healing for these men and women that have gone through this, I use this term strongly, abuse by medical practitioners that have been led astray. And I agree with, the church needs to be willing and ready. We need to be open arms, ready to take them in, because that is such a long process to work through, lifelong. I guess. So is there hope? I feel like Patricia, I mean, there is so much we could talk about. I'm sure there's plenty that we haven't covered, but I do want to kind of go into the space of hope. I feel like, I have no data to back this up, but I watch the world and how extreme it has gone, and it seems to be that there is more and more pushing back on this. And so, history is like a pendulum. We go one extreme and we start slowly swinging back to the other. So I guess, is there hope? Do you think we're going to see a bit of movement heading back to the way God's designed it? What is there out for us to look forward to, I guess?
Kes, the wonderful thing is that, as I mentioned before, we all feel the tide is turning.
Yeah.
It may be too late for a lot of young people who have been caught up in this, but the tide is turning. There's a wonderful association called GenSpect, GEN, like gender, spect, respect. GenSpect And they've got a conference coming up this weekend for which I am online enrolled, which means I have to get up like at 2 a.m. on Sunday morning.
Worth it.
Fortunately, I can listen to it later. It's in America.
Oh,
But
okay.
they're actually putting out a policy statement on conservative management for gender dysphoria. These are not Christians. These are groups of, psychologists, doctors, counselors, researchers, all the people quoted actually in our book. And they all are getting together to put out the facts to people. And
Right.
this is what I feel is that, there are all these non-Christians like Stella O'Malley, Helen Joyce, Colin Wright, James Esses, who openly say we are not Christians, speaking boldly into the area and often being cancelled and called bigots and transphobes. Very few of us speaking into this area. Very
Yeah.
few of us. But there are, there's Preston Sprinkle and Mark Yarhouse. There are a few, but we need more courageous Christians getting in there. I'm old and, it doesn't matter, but we need people in academia and practicing physicians and psychologists and pediatricians. And there's a couple of people there, Christians speaking out, but we need more. And we need
more.
them in the churches, speaking to the churches,
Absolutely.
empowering our people to be bold and speak, because we know that, as we discussed, that early affirmation doesn't work. Children get pushed onto the train. Puberty blockers, you can't block puberty. It's not
Right.
like a Spotify music track,
No.
which you just press pause and it comes back. No, it has side effects. All the cross-sex hormones, they are cross-sex hormones. They have side effects. The surgeries are horrendous. I have watched them in 1980. They are horrendous. And so, there is this tide of hope. And as a church, firstly, we pray for the whole issue, but we empower our churches to be ready. And may I please plead with parents, talk early and talk often to your children about God's good design for their body and their sex life. Please, you got to start at preschool. There was a time when we said early teens. No, not anymore, because primary schools are teaching them that they are not what their bodies, they can choose who they want to be. School libraries have books. So talk to your school, find out what's in the library, find out what's in the curriculum. Parents, you have a responsibility.
Absolutely. And preschools, don't be naive. Preschools are pushing this.
Even preschools, yeah. I've had parents email me to say that there's preschool with the rainbow flags and purple days. These are preschoolers who are being told, your parents just decided that you were a boy or a girl, but only you know the truth. You have a right to tell your parents who you are.
Yeah, it's just ludicrous. Yeah. And this is where I look at it and I do wonder, what is actually underneath all this? It's very nefarious, and it's this dismantling of the family. There is a bigger agenda at play, and I think we need to actually credit. I'm evangelical. I go to a even FIEC church, but I say this often on the podcast. I think us evangelical reformed people can be a little bit shy of the supernatural, and we don't credit that this is Satan at work, and he's trying to dismantle, like you said, God's good plan for us as humans. The family is the bedrock to make that go forth, and that may not look like a typical family. Some of us may be single, but it's about community and supporting one another and raising the next generation. That is our most important most important thing we could ever do. And so we need to not neglect the fact that the enemy has his hands in this, and he is pushing it forth with all his might. And so we need to understand there's a spiritual battle going on in light of all this as well. And so we need to
Yeah, and everything can be used. We talk of queer theory. Queer theory basically says dismantle everything that
absolutely.
is so-called normal, the family, the community, everything, dismantle everything. So you play queer theory into the so-called individualistic, you are whatever you think you are and only your desires matter. Push that in and then put social media onto that. Hey, Satan's got a field day here.
Absolutely. He's loving it. But I mean, and this is the beauty, the church has such, and this is what you said at the beginning of the episode, the church has such a wonderful opportunity to be the light in this. Wonderful, beautiful opportunity. And imagine if families were taking in these kids and just showing them a real home, really opening a space that's safe for them and speaking truth into their life. They deserve all the energy and attention for that. So you've got a book, You and Me, which helps preschoolers, helps parents.
I just happen to have it here.
Yes, look at that. But every Christmas we have like a pillowcase at the end of the bed and it gets filled up. We don't do Santa, but the kids know that that's their like little morning presents before we go to church, and we fill it up with books. So that is on my hit list for my 2-year-old. So
it's for preschoolers. It just says your body, God made, male or female. You can grow your hair if you want. You can do ballet or play soccer. You can wear pink or blue or purple or whatever, but you will always be God's good creation as boy or girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, we need more and more content like that. So Patricia, I know you also did a series of how to speak about sex and gender and everything with kids of primary and teenage age. So they can get all those books on
Yeah, that's called the what's it called? Birds and Bees by the book.
That's the one. Yeah.
It's basically a series of 6 books which go from 3 basic books that say, understanding your body, your brain, your family, and then goes on to learning about sex, learning about gender, and learning about porn. So they're little books so that parents can just choose one to read with pretty pictures and everything on it. So, it's
what
just...
age is that for?
This is primary school, for parents to read to primary schoolers.
So kindergarten upwards still?
Sorry?
Would you say kindergarten upwards?
Yeah. Anyone from kindy. And some parents actually read it to their 12 and 13-year-olds, while some say that their kids are mature and they read it when they're 4. So it's, your child. That's why we did the You and Me. So you start with You and Me, and some kids go, we want more. So then you use your discretion. Your child.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Patricia, for today. I have really appreciated it. Like I said, my mind has a lot of other questions, but we won't. We could be talking for hours.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's just, I, like you, Kaz, I'm passionate about this. So look, if anyone wants to contact me, my website, patriciawarekoon.com, is fairly simple, fairly easy to find. Happy to hear from you, and God bless you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And ladies and any gentlemen listening, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends and your family. This is a really helpful episode, I'm sure, that gives a lot of resources and practical how-tos to help other people that are facing this, or to just help equip you on how to speak about this. So share it with your friends and family, subscribe and like it on whatever platform you're listening to, and we will chat to you soon.